Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Craig Johnson. We look forward to your presentation.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay. I'm just going to convert to the screen. Hopefully you can see my slideshow okay as well. Great. Well, thank you again, once again, for inviting me to participate in this event today, and really exciting hearing the first two discussions and talks. I think we're in for a really interesting round of discussions. The paper that I'm presenting today, it's looking at the impacts of lithium mining in Latin America. And sorry, uh, sorry, I've just gone forward there. And it's part of, as Darren mentioned, it's part of a 5-year project that's funded by by SSHRC. It's an Insight grant, and you can find more information about that at our website. But I'd also like to acknowledge the fact that this paper today was co-authored with 3 colleagues based in South America, Araceli Clavillo, Mauricio Lorca, and Manuel Oliveira Andrade. And I'm going to go quickly through, I guess, some of the trends that have already been mentioned. Our main focus in this research is on lithium, and so just to start with some of the data that's already been referred to from the International Energy Agency. What we're seeing is certainly a surge in demand for a number of critical minerals that are being used in the production of renewable energy technologies. The one thing I would emphasize, I think, from this graphic here, you can see it in the yellow bars to the left, is that the vast majority of projected demand is going towards the production of electric vehicles. So quite literally, I guess the consumption habits of mainly Western industrialized economies are literally driving this energy transition. And we can see here too on the right-hand side some of the figures for projected demand in lithium, as well as graphite, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth metals. Sorry, for some reason I'm not advancing the slide here. There we go. Okay, and so this surge in demand is also creating new resource frontiers. And so this is a map from the British Geological Survey outlining some of the most recent and well-known deposits and occurrences of lithium around the world. Our focus is mainly on South America, Canada, and Australia, but as you can see, there are many other deposits that are being developed in basically every corner of the world. One thing I would emphasize here, and you can see it in the red dots and the blue dots, is that the main forms, the main methods of extracting lithium are either through conventional open pit mining techniques, which is what you see in many parts of Australia, Canada, Western Europe, and China, or through brine extraction, which entails evaporating the lithium carbonate equivalent out of the brine in large salt flats in South America. Within this context, we're seeing new players entering the field. I won't go into detail on these companies, but happy to talk about it in the Q&A. But one thing that's striking is that none of these companies is a well-known mining company. And in fact, they're all either existing or former chemical companies that have transitioned into lithium extraction for renewable energy technology production. I would add too that there's a lot of transformation, consolidation going on within this sector, as there is in many mining sectors at the moment. This is just a graphic illustrating the largest producing mines of lithium in the world. And you'll note here that Australia is significantly, by far, one of the bigger producers, as is Chile. Um, uh, Another thing we're seeing is new markets. And again, these are some of these companies are extremely well known: GM, Volkswagen, LG, and Samsung. Others, though, are ones that we wouldn't have heard of 10 or 15 years ago, or even 5 years ago. So BYD, Build Your Dreams, and CATL, two of the largest electric vehicle and battery manufacturers in the world. And all of this matters, of course, because the batteries that are driving the demand for lithium and other critical minerals are mainly being processed in mainland China. And so within this context, we're seeing a new geopolitical environment in which Western industrialized economies, particularly ones in Europe and North America, are trying to securitize critical minerals. So the IEA, they've got this critical minerals tracker that some of you might have seen. They report that there are now almost 200 critical mineral policies and regulations around the world, 100 of which were developed since 2020. And within this context, there's an emerging consensus that economic competition between the United States and China, and you can add Russia to this too, is opening a new phase of state intervention, industrial policy, and geopolitical realignment, what Teo Rio Francos calls friendshoring. And so in this context, our research is seeking to understand how and why resource nationalism as a development strategy is emerging, and also how it affects some of the social and environmental outcomes that were being referred to earlier. And I'll speak a little bit about that in a few minutes. In theory, if we look at economic and bargaining models of kind of resource politics, this combination of limited availability and growing demand should create strong conditions for exerting greater control over the resource sector. So it should work in the favor of producer states who are exporting these valuable commodities. In practice, the ability of producer states to negotiate favorable terms of extraction and development is often constrained by multinational corporations whose financial resources, time horizons, and third-party enforcement mechanisms, such as international investor protection agreements, make it very difficult for states to negotiate favorable terms for domestic groups and sectors. In the case of lithium, too, as we've already seen, global supply chains for lithium-ion batteries and electric vehicles are dominated by a small oligopoly of multinational corporations. And so within the region, within Latin America, there's a lot of public discourse around the possibility and the need to take advantage of this window of opportunity, ventana de oportunidad, that appears to be rapidly closing. And so very quickly, lithium extraction in South America has been dominated, or China has played a very large role in providing investment and securing access to unprocessed lithium carbonate. So investing roughly $4.5 billion between 2019 and 2022. It's got a dominant share of mining exports. And for many leaders, both political and economic leaders in Latin America, there's a concern that this won't last forever. The price of lithium carbonate already dropped significantly at the end of 2023. And at the same time, there are real concerns about the social and environmental impacts on local ecosystems and indigenous communities, something I can talk about in the Q&A and a little bit later on. So we've heard this story before. Ya sabemos este cuento. We know this story. There's a long history of exploitation and resource extraction in Latin America. But in this article, which I can share in the chat too, we seek to understand and explain the strategies that producer states are using to exert greater control over lithium production in Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. an area whose lithium triangle accounts for 53% of known global lithium resources. Theoretically, we use the work of Albert Hirschman and other development theorists and economists who distinguish between forward and backward linkages. I won't go into any detail here, but effectively, you're talking about trying to establish through public policy strategies that make uh, mining and extraction more profitable and generates more benefits for local communities, for domestic groups and interests. And ideally, the goal is to establish forward linkages that would allow producer states and local economies to occupy more valuable parts of the value chain. If we're looking at lithium production in the three lithium triangle states, huge variation here. As noted earlier, Chile is the world's second largest lithium producer. What's notable here is that Bolivia sits on the world's largest known deposit of lithium, yet only produced 950 metric tons of lithium in 2023. And there's an important geological and socioeconomic political story behind that we talk about in the article. But the main point to convey here is that in Bolivia's case, you've got sort of a very kind of tragic story of unrealized potential and a real concern that they're going to miss sort of the surge in demand for production, and that's reflected in export earnings and its production. In our paper, we argue that the recent surge in demand for battery metals has created new opportunities to challenge the oligopoly of multinational mining and chemical companies, but the ability of economic nationalists to reorient production linkages for enhancing incomes, technical capacity, and economic opportunity in lithium production remains structurally and historically constrained by the institutional legacies of nationalization and social mobilization that vary across the three states. And so here, this is another table from the paper. This gives you a sense of the kinds of resource nationalism that we're seeing in the three countries. And again, the main focus is on developing these forward and backward linkages that would help to foster more productive and sustainable returns on mining than we've seen historically. And so in Chile, the election of Gabriel Boric at the end of 2021 and the upsurge in social protests that happened in 2019 led to the announcement of the National Lithium Strategy in 2023, where Codelco, one of the world, or if not the world's largest copper mining company owned by the Chilean state, was given the responsibility for now developing future extraction in the Chilean Atacama salt flat. Here you can see below on government taxes and royalties, Chile has and always has had one of the highest royalty rates and tax rates in the region. And that's significant because it signifies that the state has been able to capture and demand a larger share of the rent from multinational corporations and also in relation to other countries. So if we see with Argentina and Bolivia, the comparable rate for taxes and royalties is a meager 3%, so much less significant forms of resource nationalism there. Argentina, we have very limited resource nationalism. It's an economy that's been dominated by foreign capital, and it's on the verge of becoming a major producer of lithium, but most of the value of that lithium extraction is going to be exported as well. Finally, Bolivia is the most ambitious of the three. ILB, Yacimiento de Litio Boliviano, was created in 2017. It's a state-owned company that aims to control the vast majority of the lithium value chain in Bolivia, but as mentioned earlier, has to date produced next to nothing. So huge political pressure, one could say, in Bolivia right now. In the paper, we argue that institutional legacies and political settlements have huge bearing on explaining why we see these different forms of nationalism in the three countries. So in Chile, the state's ability to exert greater control over the lithium sector reflects the enduring legacy of a political settlement between the military and the bureaucracy to restrict access to the Atacama salt flat. Um, and we don't have time to go into this now, but here, basically what happened was that the state uh, uh, designated the Atacama salt flat as a special critical resource, um, uh, uh, largely because it was being used in the nuclear industry, and from then on has played a really critical role in controlling access to that area. Argentina, on the other hand, passed most of its mining legislation during the neoliberal era of the 1990s, and the lack of resource nationalism there, I think, is reflected in that institutional legacy. Finally, Bolivia, its kind of ambitious efforts to nationalize the industry reflect the rise to power of the populist left-wing politician Evo Morales, and an institutional legacy of class and regional conflict over the privatization of state-owned mining companies in the 80s and 90s, and then a desire to wrest control of this sector from multinational capital. Our findings point to the role of social actors, including unions, political parties, and social movements in crafting new configurations of power that are able to challenge dominant state business coalitions. In particular, an institutional legacy of resistance or acquiescence to the neoliberal reforms of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s is a critical factor. And here you might note that in Chile, which is often known as one of the region's leading and protagonists of neoliberalism, you still find the state playing an enormous role in the mining sector. And there's a special reason for that I can talk about in the Q&A, but don't have time to now. Another factor that explains stronger forms of nationalism in Bolivia and Chile is the ability of political coalitions to build and maintain a national consensus on state-led development. This never happened in Argentina, but for different reasons we explore in the paper, it happens in Chile and Bolivia. Implications, what we can take away from our analysis. First of all, clearly, growing demand for critical minerals is creating new forms of political conflict and contestation in the global south. The pressure to develop the sector is enormous in all three countries, and what you're seeing is new interests and new coalitions forming to take advantage of this changing dynamic. Explanations for the variations that we find in the lithium triangle highlight the role of institutions and historical political settlements in shaping state policies and social outcomes. But again, more directly, I think, to the themes of this discussion today, they also point to the unpredictable and unforeseen consequences of promoting and pursuing an energy transition that is predicated upon serving the needs and interests of a relatively affluent class of consumers in the global north. And again, I would highlight the fact that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, that the ultimate demand, the thing that's really driving this transition, is electric vehicles and demand for individual electric vehicles in the global north. Anyway, with that, I'll close and look forward to questions and further discussions. Thank you.